The Banshee is almost always pictured as a monster today, but in her earliest Irish origins, she is the Bean Sídhe, literally the woman of the fairy mound. Her existence is tied directly to the ancient burial mounds dotting the Irish landscape. To understand the mythical woman, we have to look at her flesh and blood equivalent, professional human mourners, known as keeners, or Caoine. Starting in the 8th century, local women were hired to wail and sing laments over the bodies of the dead. This public display of sorrow was intended to help the deceased cross over to the afterlife. This wailing was not random. As we can see in historical texts detailing these funeral lamentations, the Caoine was a highly structured ritual, requiring specific poetic verses and orchestrated vocal grief. Before the Banshee became an isolated supernatural spirit, this collective mourning provided a vital outlet for communities. It gave a public shape to private sorrow. In the 1840s, the Great Famine devastated that communal structure. As millions perished from starvation and disease, the Keening women died in ditches by the thousands. Entire villages were wiped out before they could even begin to mourn. The loss of these women left a cultural vacuum. A society that had relied on professional mourners for a millennium was suddenly stripped of the people who knew how to guide the dead. The famine didn't just inflict mass starvation, it broke the community's ability to process its own casualties. Without the keeners, there was no one left to witness the scale of the loss. In response to this silence, the folklore of the Banshee mutated. She stepped into the role of the vanished mourners, becoming the last remaining keener. She was the supernatural extension of a tradition that had been violently silenced, a spirit left behind to bear witness when there were no humans left to do it. But her attendance followed a strict rule of blood. Folkloric law dictated that she only wailed for ancient families of blood, explicitly excluding modern wealth or brains and brass. Historically, she is bound to follow 5 major Gaelic family lines: the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the O'Grady's, and the Kavanaghs. When she cries for a living descendant, her lament acts as a retroactive mourning for all their ancestors as well. Through this specific rule, the Banshee became an immortal guardian of heritage. She ensures that these ancient lineages never pass away unacknowledged. As surviving families fled the famine for the United States, Canada, and Australia, they carried these beliefs with them. The Banshee was not geographically tethered to Irish soil. Because she followed the bloodline, the myth actively crossed the ocean alongside the immigrants. When these families moved into dense, modern cities, the myth adapted once again to meet the immediate needs of urban life. Dr. Patricia Lysack documented how city parents utilized the comb legend, which warns that stealing a banshee's silver comb will invite a fatal curse. This wasn't just about spirits, it was about hygiene. Parents used the legend to terrify children into not picking up lice-ridden combs off the dirty streets. The myth proved it could be practical. In the city, the Banshee transitioned from a noble death messenger into a tool used to keep children safe from the very real dangers of the gutter. Modern skeptics attempt to dismiss the Banshee as a simple misunderstanding of the natural world. The scientific consensus is that the wail is actually the high-frequency screech of a red fox or the nocturnal call of a barn owl. According to this view, the isolated human brain, terrified in the dark, translates animal panic into a supernatural myth. While science can trace the acoustic origin of the sound, this reductionist view doesn't explain why the Irish people needed to believe the sound was a woman. The true value of the Banshee is that she forces us to confront the universal fear of dying. The terror of her scream is secondary to the emotional comfort her presence provides. To the diaspora, the myth makes a final promise. Even if you die alone, far from home, an ancient spirit will bear witness and sing for you. The Banshee survived the death of the ancient world because she provides a final witness. She ensures that even when a culture is silenced, no member of it ever passes away in total silence.
We've spent this investigation establishing the Banshee as a phantom replacement for the human keener. She is the spirit that took over the ritual of mourning when the living could no longer bear the weight of the lament. But this creates a glaring contradiction. If she is fundamentally an entity of mourning and comfort, why is she consistently recorded as one of the most feared spirits in the Celtic world? The historical accounts are violently at odds. Folklore from the west of Ireland describes a terrifying, red-eyed hag with unnaturally long nails, while Scottish traditions speak of a washer by the ford, scrubbing the grave clothes of those about to die. Sometimes she manifests as a beautiful, fair-haired woman. Other times she is simply a hooded crow perching on a roof. These conflicting physical descriptions suggest her identity isn't a single, unified spirit, but rather a collection of fragmented traditions. This 19th century transcription of a keen captures the banshee as a lamenting voice on the wind, just one of many versions recorded by folklorists. To find the source of these contradictions, we have to look past the folklore of the last few centuries and trace her lineage back to a time when she wasn't an omen of death, but the power behind it. Researchers like Dr. Patricia Lysack have identified two distinct literary strands in medieval Irish texts that eventually merged to create the modern banshee. The first strand is the Bean Sídhe, literally the woman of the fairy mound. Her name links her to prehistoric burial sites like Newgrange, identifying her as a member of the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient gods who were said to have retreated into the earth after their defeat. The second strand is the Bub, the terrifying washer at the ford. In the militaristic landscape of ancient kings, anchored by sites like the Hill of Tara, she appeared on the eve of battle, cleaning the blood-soaked armor of those who would not survive the coming day. These two figures, the mourning goddess and the battlefield phantom, converge on a single supreme source, the Morrigan, the Celtic goddess of war, fate, and sovereignty. In this original form, the Morrigan did more than warn of death. She was a sovereign power who determined the outcome of kingship and decided which warriors lived or died on the battlefield. This transition took place over centuries of overlapping cultural shifts. The arrival of the Vikings, the spread of Christianity, and the adoption of patriarchal inheritance laws all worked to dismantle the influence of the old Celtic pantheon. This chart illustrates the Morrigan's demotion. Losing her authority to cause death, she was pushed down the hierarchy to merely predicting it. Stripped of prophecy, she was forced into a role of passive grief, mourning families she once protected. The contradictory banshee we recognize today is the residue of this process. She is a goddess broken into pieces, her original authority layer by layer replaced by a scream of helpless sorrow. For much of the 20th century, the banshee remained in this diminished state, seen as a spooky pop culture trope or a passive servant bound to the bloodlines of old Irish families. Recently, however, a new generation of Irish writers and artists has begun to reject this version of the myth. In anthologies like Ailbe Malone's Banshee, the weeping victim trope is being actively dismantled. These writers are radically rewriting her story, intentionally stripping away the image of the passive mourner to reconnect the spirit to her ancient roots as a sovereign queen of fate. This is a focused effort to recover the agency of female figures who were long pushed to the shadows of warriors and kings in traditional folklore. By reclaiming this history, the banshee's scream changes its meaning. It is no longer just a sound of grief for the dying. It is an expression of defiance, a reminder of a power that was buried, but never truly destroyed.